Thank you so much. We're so grateful for you. Like Jay was saying, I guess it's been about a year. I was talking to Mark Kilgore earlier. I think it's been about a year ago. We met on a Zoom call. How many of you have been on Zoom way too much over the last year? Anybody else? How many of you hate Zoom? How many of you forgot how to work Zoom on purpose? Anybody? Yeah, that's great. And so we met on a Zoom call, and you guys have been so gracious and generous to us, both just in partnership but in friendship. I would say we have several church partners, but it's been so great to get to know you and your family here. I'll give you a quick synopsis of us. This is my family right here. This is my wife, Emily. If there's any part of you that's going, how did he pull that off? I am with you. But this is my wife, Emily, and that's my son, Henry. He prefers you to call him Henry Mac Attack Holden the First. He gets that from his mom. Anyway, and then that's my daughter, Eleanor. And so Henry's 5 now, just started kindergarten. Eleanor is 3. And so we decided we were going to plant a church. And then we timed it really well. Then we decided, you know what makes things easier in life is more kids. So I'll introduce you. This is Oliver. I know, yeah. Oliver Bennett. Yeah, you can clap for that. He's cute. I'm a big fan. So we decided to do that really close to launch. So that's 2 weeks ago is when we had Oliver. So I've had a lot of coffee and other things this morning. So it's great. Just kidding. No, it's great. So that's our family. We're in Columbus, Ohio. If you're familiar with Columbus, specifically we're in Dublin. So if you've been around Dublin, I'll tell you a little bit of our story. I wanted to plant a church since I was in college. And my roommates and I, at the time, we weren't dating anyone. So we would just talk about fun things like church planning, because that's what you do when you're trying to pick up girls. And so we'd stay up really late, and we'd just dream about what would it be like one day if we planted a church. And we were both ignorant and arrogant, probably at 19 years old, to believe that we could do that. And fast forward 15 years, right about 15 years. We all worked at other places. We've done fun things, different parts of the country. We're all at different parts of the country. I was in Traverse City, Michigan. Anybody been to Traverse City, Michigan? Wow. All right. Hopefully in the summertime, because it snows 9 months out of the year. So we were there. I had a friend in Florida, and then we had a friend in Georgia. And so we felt like God was moving us to plant a church, and we called them, and they both resigned their jobs within a month and fundraised their own salaries for 4 years to move to Columbus and plant a church. And then the pandemic happened, I think 2 months later. So I just immediately apologized to both of them. So sorry. And they came. We all moved, and we had several other families that moved from different parts of the country as well. And we started a church online. We didn't know how to get started. And so I'll tell you, I don't tell everybody this. We were still in Traverse City for probably 5 months before we moved, and we were trying to reach people in Columbus. And so we just started adding friends on Facebook, because, that's what everybody loves. And we'd add friends on Facebook, send them a message, and then we started doing online services. And the way that we did online services is my wife and I were living in this tiny little cottage. I wish I could show you a picture. And we have this camera that somebody had given us. And what I did is it snowed, all through the summer and, every day in Traverse City. And so the room we were in was so small, I had to open the window up. We set the camera outside with an umbrella on top of it, and we filmed our first online service at 10 o'clock at night while the kids were asleep. And we did this whole Good Friday thing, and that's how we got started. And so now we have about 100 launch team members-ish, somewhere in that range. And then we're meeting, our grand opening is on Sunday. And so I'll tell you one more thing, and this is kind of fun. We knew exactly where we wanted to be. We knew exactly the venue that we wanted to be a part of. And so for almost a year and a half, we started negotiating with this venue. And they gave us a number that was real cute if you weren't a church plant. And we were like, that's really fun, we're not gonna do that. So we went there and we started praying every Sunday as a team. We just go there and show up. And they came down to not only cheaper than the schools that we could get it for, but cheaper than any other facility in Dublin that we could get it for. And they signed a lease with us for the year. And so we're going to get to open the doors at our first service there next week. And so I think Mark's going to tell you this, but any of you guys who want to come to Columbus, Jay said it was okay, so we're fine. But yeah, so that'll be next week. And we're doing that. So that's a little bit about our story. I'll tell you what we're going to do today. I want to do a couple things. We're going to look at one of my favorite parts of the Bible. And if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, you've probably heard this passage before. If you're here and you grew up in church, anybody grow up in church around here? You grew up flannel graph days. You remember those? Anybody? Yeah. You remember? Anybody had to memorize Bible verses? Anybody had to do that? Yeah. Your parents give you candy for that. That's great. So we're going to talk about one of the verses in Scripture that you probably had to memorize. Jesus wept, but we're going to talk all the way around that. that, so hopefully everybody in the room has memorized that. If not, now you have. So we're going to talk about that. Before we do, I want to do this. I want to take you on a little bit of a journey. So how many of you have been camping? Anybody been camping, enjoy camping, outdoorsmen, women, and people? Great. All right, so let's do this. Let's look at this picture real quick. I want to take you here as much as I can for a second. So if you think about camping and you go out into the wilderness, do you remember the very first time you went, right? I want you to kind of like take you all the way back. Maybe you went with your dad or you went with your mom or a group of friends. Apparently there's birds in the room. That's fantastic. You go out and you're camping, and then somebody at some point along the way looks at you and starts teaching you what you should do when you're outdoors, right? There's a little bit of this where you have to learn sort of the whole thing of being outdoors. Like you have to make a fire. How many of you can like make a fire on your own and you're very competent in that? Anybody? You should be proud. She's like, yes, all day long. That's great. I was not that kid. I did this for the first time when I was 9 years old, and we did this, and I was both excited and scared out of my mind because I had not been outside all night like that before. And so I'm going with 3 other men. I grew up in a single-parent home, so it was just me and these guys, their sons. We're out here. And then you can kind of fast forward to the night, and you've probably seen stuff like this before where you go camping, and it gets really dark and really exciting. And I'll never forget that night. One of the men there, I'm probably like 8 or 9 years old, he looks at me and he says these words. He says, I'm just going to need you to trust me tonight. I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that it's going to be all right. We're good. He had a machete. I'm not sure what you're going to do with that if a bear showed up, but he felt real confident. You know what I mean? So he had this whole thing, and he keeps looking at me, and he keeps saying, you just need to breathe. You just need to trust me. And so we make it through the night. We get up way too early in the morning. He makes the worst breakfast of hot dogs and cheese and Velveeta cheese. Velveeta cheese, anybody? Because that's what you take when you're camping. And we get up the next morning, and then we go to this special place that he was so excited to show me. We go to this bridge. How many of you ever been to like a bridge out in the wilderness? Anybody, you ever seen one of these? Real quick, this will help me. Yeah, you've seen this. All right, when you see a bridge like this out in the wilderness, 2 thoughts enter your head. Number 1, should I cross that? And then number 2, why in the world would I ever cross that, you know? Like there's a little bit of you that's very confident that this could very much go bad, right? He walks me to this bridge, and I'll never forget what he says. He gets me to this bridge specifically like this, and I look at this and I look down and I think to myself, this is hanging by like wires on a tree. What's wrong with you? And he looks at me almost like a father-son type thing, and again, he leans in again and he says this. He says, do you trust me? Will you believe that it's going to be okay? Now, here's the thing about belief, and you know this as well. You don't really get to decide what you believe, right? Let's go to the next one if we can. You don't really get to decide what you believe all the time in life. You just kind of believe things, don't you? Like when you were a kid, you may or may not, but probably did believe in fairy tales at some point or along the way. How many of you maybe believe that you were Superman? Like maybe you could fly. Nobody proved you wrong yet until you proved yourself wrong, you know? Like there's a little bit of you where you just believed certain things maybe as a child. And when it comes to like other parts of your life, you know, when you're a kid, you believe like, hey, maybe I'm going to be in the NBA. And everyone looks at you and goes like, maybe not, you know? Like there's a little bit of that. Or maybe you're going to be successful in whatever you want to fill the blank in with. Maybe you're going to be a straight A student. Maybe you're going to do all these things. Have you ever played like, you know, any sort of sports where a coach told you, you know, you could do anything if you work hard enough? And you're like, bro, you're 5'3". No, you know what I mean? Like maybe not. And there's a little bit of you where you just believed at some point along the way and at some point in your life that you could do anything or that anything was possible or that you could have whatever it took. And then all of a sudden you get to a point in your life where some of those beliefs just start to fall away, right? And you get to a point in some of our lives where you get to the expectations that you have about your life. And sometimes the expectations don't match what's actually happening, right? And this is all interesting and fun when you're talking about like, you know, NBA or basketball or, you know, whatever those things are. But then it comes to faith. And then sometimes your expectations of what God is or what God should do or what a good God would do all of a sudden don't match up either. And your expectations of what the world could be and should look like also don't match up, and there's a gap in those places. And a couple things happen, right? If you're here at church, especially the 9 o'clock crowd, let's be honest, a lot of you have probably been around church maybe for a while. A lot of people who are church people for a long time, what they do is they take those expectations or those questions or those problems, and what they do is they get really good at boxing up those unmet expectations or problems and setting them aside and only focusing on the things that are more easily believed. But there's a lot of people, and these are the people that I work with a lot in Columbus, people that we're really creating our church for, that they didn't do that. They didn't put it in a box and continue to believe anyway. What a lot of people do is when expectations happen about God or their own life or faith or those sorts of moments, what they do is they don't put it in a box and put it away. They open all of that up and it all sort of fleshes itself out, especially at Thanksgiving dinner with your kids, right? Like that's when, let's talk about religion and politics then, Merry Christmas, There's a little bit of that. And they open it all up and it's all out. And what they do, and you've seen this probably before, you probably know people like this, where their unmet expectations of God or the world or the church or maybe even you as a friend or a parent, there's all these unmet expectations. And what they do is they just stop believing. They just outgrow that part of their faith. And what's so interesting to me is both followers of Jesus and people who are not followers of Jesus oftentimes find themselves in places where you either choose to ignore these unmet expectations or these problems or these struggles, or what you do is you just kind of unearth them all, and then a lot of people just kind of walk away from the whole thing, and practically, they're just sort of agnostic to the world. There might be a God up there, but he obviously didn't show up here or there or whenever. I have a friend that I was talking to, we were talking about September 11th. She was in one of the towers when the plane hit. She worked for Morgan Stanley. Can you imagine this? It was her first day on the job as a young 20-something. And she was saved by somebody on September 11th who, as it came down, the building ended up coming down, she got out, they shoved her under a car as the building was coming down. She was there yesterday telling more of the story. And then she talks about this, how she ended up having to there weren't places for her to go. She had to walk across the bridge, trying to just find someone to get in contact with. She had all these things. Now, I'm interested in her story, but I'm also interested in what does that do to a person's faith? When you grow up being told that God is a good God, and he's a good God, and good God will do good things, and you were there in that moment, and those expectations of him, or what the world should be or could be, feel like they shatter. I'll never forget what she said. She said, people would tell me to just believe, but I couldn't just believe like that. In the same way that you just don't believe in the Cinderella story like that anymore, or in some of the stories that you grew up with anymore. So here's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. I want to look at a passage of scripture that talks about this, and when Jesus actually leans into this sort of thing. Because when you read through the New Testament, you get a couple things. You get Jesus doing these miraculous, beautiful, incredible, extraordinary things. You get him teaching things that are extraordinarily subversive, and then people get very angry, and it's fun to watch him turn into Jim from The Office and just be very sarcastic to people. Yes, I compared Jesus to Jim, but we will talk about that later. Anyway, you have all these moments, and then you have moments where Jesus is both extremely compassionate and extremely direct when it comes to leaning into faith. So we're going to be in John chapter 11. I'll tell you the back part of this is Jesus is almost like ancient world famous, right? So he's almost like an influencer, and not just because of what he's teaching. He starts healing people, and everybody shows up to see him heal people, which is what you do when people start doing supernatural, miraculous things. So in John chapter 11, the backstory is Jesus almost like at the height of some of his ministry. He's doing all of these sorts of things. People are showing up to see what else is Jesus going to do. And then he's teaching. And then all the religious people are getting very frustrated with him. And then all the non-religious people are kind of sitting there like, I'm glad you told them that. A little bit of that. And he's doing all these miraculous things. And then he has this friendship, this relationship with a guy named Lazarus, who we're going to talk about how something extraordinary begins to happen in their relationship. So this is John chapter 11, verse 17. Here's what it says. It says, Jesus then arrives to this area. So he's told about it. He waits to go with Lazarus. He's dying. Jesus showed up. We know that you've done miracles. If you could do that, that'd be great. Jesus waits. And what John chapter 11 says, it says, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. So he shows up to this area where his friend, Lazarus has now passed away. It's been 4 days. He could have shown up. A lot of people believe that he could have just shown up and fixed this problem, and he doesn't, which creates this deep tension with the family, right? The people that are around who also love Lazarus go, Jesus, it feels like you just kind of left us high and dry. We've seen you do extraordinary things. Couldn't you do an extraordinary thing, I don't know, for your friend? And here's what happened. It says, it goes on, it says this. It says, now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary, who were connected to Lazarus, to comfort them in the loss of their brother, so it's their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but I love this, but Mary stayed home. Now, here's what I love. I'm Mary. I'm not walking out to see you if I feel like you could have fixed this, right? Now, Martha runs out to meet him, and she runs out in this emotional sort of like, almost like begging him sort of way. It goes on, it says this. Martha says this, Lord, almost like submissive right off the gate. Lord, like I know you've done extraordinary things. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So don't miss this. That in the midst of pain and tragedy and loss of expectation and struggle, she comes to Jesus going, look, I know you didn't do what I thought you should do, but here's the thing, I believe you still can. And then she's almost like begging him like, hey, we just do this sort of thing. And then Jesus responds to her and says this, your brother will rise again. Now, on this side of like history, when you read the Bible, especially if you've been around church, you just sort of believe that Jesus can. It's almost like the moment in a Superman movie when it's like the person's falling. He's like, oh no, how are we going to do it? And Superman swoops in, but you expected him to. Now, here's what I want you to do. If you weren't expecting that, and you're just here living, breathing in the flesh in the ancient world, and Jesus goes, look, he's dead, but he will rise again. There's a little bit of you, at least a little bit, that would go, I don't know that I've seen that before. I don't know about that. There's got to be at least a little bit of doubt. But with Martha, she was so confident and had so much trust in Jesus. She responds to this. She goes, I know that he will rise again, and I love this, in the resurrection at the last day. Now, this is my favorite part of the passage, and I love this. What she does is she zooms out far enough to where Jesus wouldn't actually have to do the miracle. You ever done this before? Like, I can hold on to my faith enough to believe that he will rise again one day, which is certainly miraculous, but not the thing that she most wanted. This is a great move, and you've seen this before. You've probably done this. I've done this all the time, where I will maintain my faith, but with a deep distance from what I actually think is possible in the here and in the now. And what Jesus says next is complicated and messy and weird all at the same time. He says to her, don't you know, like, I am the resurrection and the life. Would you read this on this side of history again? You've probably heard messages around this. But if you're hearing somebody look at you and say, I'm the resurrection and the life, that's just odd. How many of you have siblings? Anybody have siblings in the room? Imagine your brother looking at you. I am the resurrection and the life. You just slap him at that point, right? You don't say anything to him. You just like, no, wait. You're like, imagine your boss looking at you saying, I'm the resurrection and the life. Imagine a preacher saying that to you, a friend. People don't say that to each other. And even if he's done miraculous thing, he's going, no, you're pointing to a future resurrection. What I'm talking about is going, that power exists and is me. And he says, the one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And then he says a phrase that just is maddening. He says, do you believe this? Which is the same thing as that man who's a dad, as I look at that bridge in front of me going, do you believe? Do you believe me? And the honest answer to this question, the real honest answer to this question, is more times than not, I don't know. I don't know how to both be a critical thinker in the now and also muster up belief or muster up faith. See, for many of us, breathing and belief are similar. You just do it. You just are. For some of you, though, your belief was like a vapor that it's just, somewhere or another, it's just gone. Something that you've clinged to or reached for, but it's not there, or you've packaged it away. And what Jesus is simply looking at this woman going, you're in pain and you're hurting, and I'm telling you that all power is within me. Do you believe? Not did you muster it up, but do you? Here's what she says. I love this. She says, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come to the world. Which is not a distancing sort of thing, that one day it's all going to be okay kind of response. It's a submission thing. That I'm here, open-handed, fully open-handed, going, I trust that you are who you said that you are. And that my faith is in you. Now, I want to unpack this phrase real quick because this really does matter to me a lot. The phrase is simply like, I believe, right? Now, you know what the definition of this is, but just for clarity's sake, I want to talk about this for a second. Let's hit the next one if we can. So, believing is simply this: to consider to be true or honest, to accept the word or evidence. And let's click it one more time. Let me show you this. But for us, many of the times, it's also to accept something as true or genuine or real. Now, at bare minimum, this is complicated. Because you believe because you pull in evidence, you believe because you think about things critically, you believe because all of this is around you, but this isn't forced on you. If you're an empty nester in the room, you know that this is true because as soon as your kids hit college or 18 or 19 or 20 years old, you realize that your influence, and by influence I mean forceful nature of you being able to take away the car, evaporated, right? It can't be forced upon you. At some point or another, you know this if you have kids, your beliefs that you try to put on them, at some point or another will either become a faith of their own or not. You can't forcefully do that to someone. It is developed through the experience of something, right? I put in my notes, I said it this way: the belief is cultivated specifically through experience. If we go to the next one, belief is cultivated through experience, but not just knowledge. And at the end of the day, it's connected to our ability to both feel certainty, but also not be certain, which is really a simple way of saying it's all about trust. Who have you placed your trust in? Who have you stood there and go, I don't have all the answers, it's still complicated, I don't know what to do with all that, and I have my doubts, I have all of that together, but at the end of the day, I'm going to trust in you. And this is what Martha does so well. She comes to Jesus and going, you know what, I don't have all the answers. I can't forcefully do this, even though you're talking about things that I'm going to even understand. I am placing my trust in you because where else do I go here? And then it goes on and it says this. Martha then gets Mary. Mary shows up to this. Mary's the one who didn't show up to Jesus. And then Mary reached the place where Jesus was, and I love this. She sees him and she falls at his feet and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Or more simply put, if you would have done it my way, this would have all gone so much better. And he goes on, he says, when Jesus saw her not crying, but weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping. So there's a whole crew of people, aunts, uncles, relatives, weird religious leaders, people that you don't talk to all the time. They all show up. He was deeply moved in spirit and also troubled. And then it says this, he goes, where have you laid him? And this is the moment where everything about Jesus gets flipped on its head. Because he's not just a miracle worker, and he's not some guy who's just teaching subversive political things at the time. He is God in the flesh and fully human. In a moment where he's with these people who are grieving. And it's from that place that we get these words that Jesus wept. That Jesus joined them in their pain and suffering and doubt and struggle and questions. That he opened that box up that they had sort of neatly put everything in that they could ignore, and he opens it up and he unearths it. And he doesn't just solve it like that immediately. he sits in that with them. And he weeps. And then in the back of this crowd, you have all the people who watch Hallmark movies. They respond with this. See how he loved him? They were moved in the back. Oh, that's cute. And then Jesus, human, fully God, in it with grief and sorrow, then comes back with power. And he responds to those people who said, hey, see how he loved it? There's a cute part. And then there's the other group of people that said, look, some of them said, hey, could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying? So there's all the doubters around too. And then Jesus again, once more deeply moved, it goes on and it says this, comes to the tomb. And then he talks about what the tomb was. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And Jesus stands outside with all of these people around. I want you to picture this as best you can. Cave, stone. Jesus shows up there with a whole posse behind him, grieving sisters there with him. And he simply says, take away the stone. Now, I want to talk about this for just a second. In fact, I'm going to show you a picture. This is obviously not the exact site, but this is something that it could have looked like, right? You see a really heavy stone. You see the thing that's going to be there. I mean, this is so interesting. What Jesus does in this moment, I think, is so fascinating. If you're going to raise somebody from the dead, doesn't it make sense that you could also move a rock? Right? Now here's what Jesus does. Right, let me show you. Let me get a couple volunteers. Can I steal you real quick? Sorry. Wade, right? Me and Wade are best friends. Can I get two other people real quick? I need two other people. This is the awkward moment. Who's going to raise their hand, people? Let's do this together. Two other people. I need strong men right here. He's like, I'm very strong. That's great. That's great. Let me get one other. Can I get one other person to come up here real quick? What's your name?
Josh.
Josh. That's great. Let me get one other person real quick. Can I get one other? Everybody's looking around. Somebody's sneaking their seat. Come on up. What's your name? Steve. Everybody give it up for Steve as he comes up. Thanks so much. For the record, I think you could take both of them. I believe you can. All right, come over here real quick. All right, so here's what Jesus does. I think this is such a powerful thing. Why don't you stand over there, all three of you together? Let's just stand over here. These are very strong men, right? I mean, these guys got it going on. They're working out. They're crossfitting. They're P90Xing, all the things that I should be doing. Anyway, so they're doing that. All right, so here you are. And what Jesus does, and I love it. I want you to get this visual. Jesus does something extraordinary in a moment that's unfinished. There's all the people behind him. There's all the people around him. Then Jesus looks at the group of like big, strong, burly, strapping? Yeah, it works. Yeah, strapping men. I don't know what that means. Does strapping work? Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. He looks at these men and he goes, hey, Steve, here's what I want you to do. I want you to put your hand on this rock. So we'll just do this together. We'll pretend. Put your hand like on that rock. We'll do that real quick. Now, Steve's strong, but Steve can't do it by himself. To which Jesus then could have gone, you know what, I got Steve. Let me just like superpower Steve. Now he's ready to go, right? He doesn't do that. He leaves what's unfinished still unfinished. And then he comes over to Wade. He's like, Wade, you're also very strong. Steve, keep pushing on that rock. Wade, I need your help. Steve needs your help. Go ahead, do that. Now again, Jesus is about to raise somebody from the dead. And the Avengers. That is great. And they can't do it together. Then he comes back over. Tell me your name one more time. I'm sorry. Josh. Now, Josh is going to be the one who actually does it. Let's give it up for Josh real quick. Josh, you ready? All right, move that stone, fellas. And they push, and they push. And finally, y'all are killing it. That's great. The stone moves. And then he goes, that's great. Just stand there. And then what happens next? Jesus stands there and is about to do this amazing, amazing miracle. After what was left unfinished, he grabs three men to do what Jesus could have easily done. Give it up for these fellas right here. Thank you so much. Avengers Unite. Fantastic. Thank you. Here's the point. What Jesus seemingly leaves, let's go to the next one. What Jesus seemingly leaves unfinished, right, is always an invitation to gather and join him in the miracle. Always. The Jesus who is about to raise someone from the dead invites three average but very strong men to come and move the stone. Now, have you ever thought about this? Then what Jesus does next is he calls Lazarus out. Because that's what you do when you're Jesus and you're about to raise somebody from the dead. Lazarus, come out. And everybody's kind of standing there. There's the first row of people that are all looking around like, this is going to happen. There's like the second row of doubters is like, there's no way. And then there's a third row of people that are like, if this happens, I'm going to make some money. I don't know how, but we're going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. Jesus said, Lazarus, come out. Now, have you ever thought about this before? He had been in there for 4 days. It's like if you had 3 7th grade boys that all smelled bad without Old Spice. That's the odor. Jesus prays, and he says, come out. And what happens next is not the view of Lazarus that I had in my head. Let me show you this real quick. If we can just go to the next one. Yeah. It says, the dead man came out, and his hands and his feet were wrapped with strips of linen and cloths around his face. When I pictured this as a kid, I pictured this, right? I pictured that coming out of the grave. Like LeBron walking out, whatever that is, like. I did not picture this, right? I thought he came out like just naked and LeBron style and like, here we go. But he comes out messy, smelly, chaotic, awful, weird, oddly shaped, not pretty, needing some Old Spice. And then Jesus simply says these words. He says this. He says, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Now again, if you can raise a guy from the grave, don't you think you could take the clothes off yourself? But Jesus says, no, now you prepare him to live again. Now, the power of this is that if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, and you've been a follower of Jesus for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and you have these questions that you've put in a box and you put off to the side, and you're comfortable believing the things that you believe, but there's a whole other set of things over here that you've just not touched. I'm telling you this. Jesus wants to open that box and be present with you in it. Jesus doesn't want you to float through life pretending that all of that's okay. He wants you to open the box because he's big enough for your doubts and your questions and your struggle. And if you're here because your wife forced you to come again, but deep down you don't believe, I believe the God of the universe looks at you and goes, okay, but lean in with me and trust me and follow me. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it all together yet. Just lean in and trust and follow. I'm going to summarize this story, and this is what I really hope for us we kind of take away is this. For many of you, this whole thing will start with, has started with, something that has broken your heart that needs to be unearthed and pulled out and looked at again. And then at some point along the way, the things that you said that you believed may or may not have lined up with your experience. And what happens next is what I think you should do is, even with that broken heart, I think you should move forward even with a reluctant belief of should I step or should I not, and move forward in that sort of thing. And then this is a critical thing that I tell anybody who's struggling with their faith. What you do next with all that is you roll up your sleeve and you roll that stone with other people. Because Jesus doesn't need you to roll the stone. Jesus invites you into the miracle with him. And as you take step after step after step after step, there's something, and you've seen this before, that happens to your heart and your life, that you see the world differently. And I'll tell you this, and it's at that point that I think most people begin to not just see or believe again, but they experience the person of Jesus. And that is where your doubt, questions, faith, all of that then meets the fullness of humanity, and you move forward in a relationship with Jesus. So the bottom line, and then I'm going to wrap up and we'll pray here in a second, is this. That I think when it comes to your beliefs, follower of Jesus or not, our beliefs follow the movement of our hearts and also our hands. And it requires you to engage with both of those things. It requires you to open those boxes, to acknowledge what you believe or don't believe about God, and then also get involved with people who are moving in the same direction. Let me pray for you real quick. Father, we thank you so much for this beautiful, beautiful narrative in John. And we thank you for what you did, but also what you're still doing in the hearts and lives of us. So, Father, I pray for the person that's here, and it's been 10 years, 20 years, 30 years since they've ever maybe even looked at those doubts or questions or beliefs that they've had or lost along the way. And for whatever reason, they've continued to move forward, maybe in their faith, but they've just neglected these things with the assumption that you didn't want to go there with them or they couldn't have answers. And I pray that you would burst open those boxes so they could grow more fully in their faith and who you've called them to be. And Father, I pray for the person in this room who their life experience or their expectations have just seemingly taught them that if you're there, you're not engaged with them. God, I ask for that person that you would just simply help them to, in the same way that they would take a step onto that bridge, put their hands on that stone, that they would just trust you for whatever the next step in the journey is. And God, that you would make yourself so tangibly present to them, it would be undeniable that you're working in their life. We thank you for that. Praise you for it. In Jesus' name we pray.